Good morning. I would like to give you a tour of the website I created based on the original research work that I've done this semester. Here you can see a link to the web page. Or actually, you can see the web page itself. And I've got I did my as my innovation virtual tabletop software. This is a bit more of a niche thing than some of the more general email messaging as the examples. I think it's a little bit riskier, but I also think it is an important example of innovations that computers bring us that are a mix of both technology and social solutions. So here I've got my banner and I've used a map like one would on a virtual tabletop. And I start with kind of a definition of what this is. When you play Dungeons and Dragons or other role-playing games, and for tabletop role-playing games, I'm using Dungeons and Dragons as kind of an eponym since that's the really what everyone thinks of here, though there are many different games. Normally, when you play, you're sitting around a table with friends and or you're at a game store, again, sitting around a table. There'll be a big map in the middle, and the game master will use different maps to portray different situations and different settings. And this actually lends itself really well to being played remotely. During the COVID times, the COVID years, we all got used to being in Zoom meetings or Zoom-like meetings and working remotely. And the virtual tabletop took that experience and brought it to the Zoom meeting, as it were. Here in my first answer, I describe my innovation. This is also my embed text. And in my embed text, I did use a little CSS to change the definition of the normal font size here. And I added some emphasis and some italics and a couple of links. And then here I've got a couple of pictures that show you kind of the basics of what this does. Your monsters and characters all have tokens that appear on the map. The UI of the system will open up various windows to access databases. These are SQL databases that are stored alongside or that run alongside the application, the UI application. And here's an image, which I'll show a bit larger later in the presentation, of a character sheet and how players interact with this service. If we look at the impact of this, I've laid these questions out with their answers. And this has been this has actually been a blessing and a necessary evil in many ways. That is, we see this innovation being used in many games, not just Dungeons and Dragons. It allows you to play without having to go to the game store or without having to get together. And this has had a real impact on the community here in Rhode Island and in New England, actually, I think nationwide. But I'm familiar with the communities, the gaming communities here in Rhode Island and in New England. And the virtual tabletop breaks down the barriers that COVID-19 basically introduced us to, the isolation and the remoteness. And what's nice about this is that we're seeing some suggestion that people who are still dealing with the isolation, still dealing with the social anxiety that comes with returning to the game stores, are able to feel very comfortable with this type of interaction. It actually works really well with them. Playing these games allow you to take the role of different characters and are also found to increase empathy. So by encouraging people to play these games and by bringing more people into these games, which, again, the VTTs, these virtual tabletops, make the game more accessible. You bring more people in, and it's a way of teaching empathy and helping people deal with the challenges of mobility and social anxiety. Pardon me. Interestingly, this idea of virtual tabletop or a gaming world online has also spread to other fields. I taught chemistry for 20 years, and here is on Steam a virtual chemistry lab. It's currently under development. However, this particular lab assignment, if we can switch here to it, is literally a this is the Unity engine. It's just the same game engine you would make a shoot 'em up game or a strategic game, and it instead has all the chemistry equipment that you would have in a chemistry lab. And so you can perform experiments as you would in a lab, but you can do them in this controlled virtual environment. The research right now suggests that it doesn't really matter whether you are in person or you're doing it virtually. You still learn the same concepts and you get a very similar experience to the hands-on by doing a lab under these conditions. The lab itself is programmed to handle all of the different things that can occur as you mix the chemicals, and some are more sort of open world than others, in which in this particular game, they're going to design it so you can just walk up to the cabinet, choose the chemicals you wish, and then perform the experiment. And it's got several built-in experiments. This has the benefit of not having to clean up dangerous chemicals, which for a public school is a real issue. There's a particular lab with copper 2 sulfate that I enjoy doing because you get to learn a couple of different concepts and then recrystallize the copper 2 sulfate. And if you do it well, you get beautiful crystals at the end, these beautiful orthorhombic crystals. Unfortunately, it's not the sort of thing that can be done well. It's a skin irritant, and it's a material you can't flush down the sink. So there are several safety concerns that are alleviated by performing these virtually. I've also included a player's guide here to how to use a Foundry virtual tabletop as one specific example. And from my own survey work, I was able to, I asked just a couple of very basic questions, whether whether one considered the impact of virtual tabletops to be positive or negative or simply neutral. And what's interesting is I posted the survey to a handful of communities of gamers that I met online. So this was not to general people, it was to specifically to that niche group of people who already were playing these games, so that I could focus specifically on whether or not the virtual tabletop was a good thing. And not surprisingly, I got really a very large percentage saying that it was positively perceived, both personally and to the community. Though interestingly, there was a negative piece of this and a neutral piece, a single neutral person. The negative piece was really I think, the very valid point that being together around the table is the better way to play. However, when you're not able to get together around the table and play, this is a necessary evil, and it does work. Generally seen, however, even with the people who saw it negatively, it was generally viewed as a positive both to the community and to the individuals who take and use it. That's my infographic. The data for that research is down here at the bottom. I've also left in a couple more pivot tables I made as I was exploring that data for trends. Now, this is where it actually gets, I think, particularly interesting. This is a full screenshot, a full version of that picture you saw on the first page. And the virtual tabletop starts with kind of the map in the background. There's a grid over that map, and that's where you'd put your little tokens for players and monsters. And there are some buttons here where the users can control how their monsters or how their players move and how they cast their spells and use their skills. There's a very familiar looking hotbar down here. Any game in which you're interacting in a virtual world often comes with a hotbar of skills. Even Minecraft has a 9-button hotbar where you can load your skills or your materials. And over here on the right side, there's a number of buttons that allow you to access the database. It's a SQL database, and it comes loaded or can be loaded with all of the rules of your game. So the rules, and then the monsters and the skills and the weapons and the social skills that you would use. All of your feats are loaded into databases. And then this is an example of a character sheet. The particular tabletop role-playing game that I play is Pathfinder. Again, most people know D&D, and this game grew out of Dungeons and Dragons. That's the more eponymous game. However, When you play these games, you have different character traits. So your character's ancestry, their class, their heritage, their background would all come from the database. These database buttons up here would allow you to access panels that show the different possibilities. You drag and drop them in, and this game is coded in Node.js, so it actually runs in a Chrome browser essentially, but can run on any platform, and many of the mobile platforms, as well as Linux and Windows and Mac. It doesn't really matter what you're playing in. If you can run a Chrome browser, you can run a Node.js application. So you drag and drop the various skills onto the character sheet, and the character sheet knows your abilities and your scores, and it does all of the math. There's a bit of math in the background that's done here. And the character sheet, the program does all of that math behind the scenes. So that if you wanted to, if you were a wizard and you wanted to cast a fireball spell, you could go into the database and find the spell, or by going onto your character sheet, there's a button here for spells, and you could cast the spell from your spell book, or you could even drag and drop it down here to the hotbar. So on the panel, you click on the enemy you wish to cast the spell on, you hit the hotbar and cast the spell, and the math is done for you. Over here on the side, the program will go into the database and it will bring up a card that shows the details of how that spell works and who it affects and what saving throws and things are available. And then it shows what you have to roll here, and then does the rolling for you. And with a fancy add-on, you can even get it to show you the dice. It will do the roll for you. So all the math is kind of done. It'll tell you whether or not you've hit or you've succeeded with that skill. If you're trying to, if you're engaged in diplomacy, you can use a skill for your diplomacy skill, and this card will tell you what that involves and what you can do with that skill, and then it will do the roll for you. This acts as kind of a stream, a log, so the players can go back and see what other folks have rolled, see what other folks have done on their turn. And of course, because the dice are all being rolled electronically, you're keeping everybody honest and above board in this remote setting, so everybody can see what's being done, what skills are being used, and what successes are being had. These can also be rolled. When you do a roll, you can say, I want to roll a skill, but I want the roll to be private so that only the game master can see it, or so that only the player you're interacting with can see it. And if we had counters to these skills, we'd have them listed here. Over here, there's a couple of dice with different saving throws. For instance, when I cast a fireball spell, you get to use a saving throw based on your reflexes, which is a kind of a combination of your dexterity and your intelligence. Your reflexes, dexterity primarily. And you would roll a dice and you would see whether or not you could jump out of the way of that fireball spell if it was being cast on you. The user interacts with this program on their computer. So when I use the virtual tabletop, I'm using Foundry Virtual Tabletop. I actually set up a virtual machine on my laptop. So I'm running the server in this in a Unix virtual machine, and there's no graphical interface or anything, no screen on that. It's just got a command line, and I run the interface there. And then on the main partition of my laptop, or from the main partition of my laptop, I open Chrome and I run the application where I get the graphical user interface. So I've got both of these running. Other people at the table will connect to this by connecting to the server on my laptop, the virtual machine on my laptop. They will actually get online and connect to that virtual machine, and we'll all be accessing the same database, and we'll be able to interact with each other there. I've highlighted the abstraction layer that Node.js approaches, and the coding and the algorithms that are all used kind of under the hood to do the math and the calculations make this a very accessible tool to people who might find, quite honestly, Pathfinder's got a reputation for being a little math heavy. And having tools like this makes the entire experience more accessible to folks who find that intimidating. I've also included another player's guide down here at the bottom. There's a lot of good material available online for both players and game masters. If someone did not feel as tech savvy or didn't want to set up a local server, there are even hosting sites that will set the server up for you, so you can just log in with the Node.js application and access the application from wherever you are connected to the internet. Leveraging the cloud, as it were. In my references, I include 3 references specifically. One from EN World, which is a TTRPG forum and website. It's been around for many years. Another podcasting team, a couple of content creators have started Roll for Initiative, which has been covering Dungeons and Dragons and other TTRPGs for half a dozen years now. And they have done a lot of work kind of exposing people to these programs and showing some of the benefits of them. And then Sergio Solazano, pardon me, works for the Gamer website, which is a more generic gaming community. But he wrote a really nice article talking about Roll20, which is an older tabletop role-playing system, piece of software, and talks about how we transitioned into and then out of the pandemic when these tools became not only pervasive, but very popular. Thank you very much for your time. The link to my website is available in the assignment. And yeah, I hope you get a chance to try this someday.